Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. Today I'm going to start with the Canadian short fiction writer Mavis Gallant. I have one collection of her short fiction, Paris Stories. I picked this up late last year and didn't get on with it as much as I had hoped I would. I tried the collection twice, I started in October and got a few stories in, and then I picked up where I left off in December, if I'm remembering correctly, and made some headway, and then things petered off again. So I'm hoping coming back to this collection sometime this year might mean for a much more enjoyable reading experience. So I have unfinished business with Paris Stories. Although maybe the collection should have been European stories, because not many of the stories actually take place in Paris. Next is The Forsyte Saga by John Galsworthy. This is an omnibus edition that includes Amana Property, in Chancery, and To Let. Yeah. So it's the three novels of the Forsyte Saga. So this is a family saga that was published in the early 20th century. And in the early 21st century, had a PBS Masterpiece Theater adaptation, which is this omnibus's cover is the miniseries tie-in. I've read the first of the Forsyte novels ages ago and really enjoyed it, but I haven't revisited the series since. Once again, I do believe the 2027 library tour is going to be me clearing the shelves, putting them somewhere, and showing the books that way. Okay, there we go. Okay, next is In Plenty's Woods by Brendan Galvin. This is from LSU Press that I picked up last year during LSU's 40% off sale. I have not gotten around to it yet, so I have a bookmark. I'm planning on reading it hopefully next week. But I do love the purple on this cover. It is just really nice shade. Next is Gao Xingjiang, or Gao Xingjian. His novel Soul Mountain, translated by Mabel Lee. So translated from the Mandarin by Mabel Lee. This is a weird novel. I've had two goes at it, separated by about 20 years. And I made it a little bit further most recently, a few years ago. But I never finished this novel, so I have some unfinished business with this. Isaac by Curtis Gardner. This is a recent gay novel from last year about a young man who is just entering the dating scene and finds himself in a relationship with an older man who becomes abusive. Have not gotten around to reading it yet, though. Garner has a new novel out that hasn't yet been published in the U.S., but is out in the U.K. The Words That Remain by Stênio Gardel, translated from the Portuguese by Bruna Dantas Lobato. This won the National Book Award for Translated Literature in 2023, and is about an elderly gay Brazilian who is learning how to read, so that he can read a letter that his lover, when he was a teenager, wrote him before they separated. I have some unfinished business with this novel. North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a Victorian novel about a young woman whose father leaves his church position to become a tutor in the north of England, in the more industrializing north of England, and the main character falling in love with a local industrialist who is perhaps not as bad as he actually would have been in real life. I read this novel 19 years ago in the fall. It would have been, will be 20 years ago, and rather liked it. But I'd gotten rid of that edition and had been thinking about beefing up my Victorian representation in my library, and so I decided to re-add this to my collection. The next two are by Matthew Gilman. First is Night Logic. So this is a slim volume of poetry put out by Tupelo Press, distributed by the University of Chicago Press. This is a very nice collection of poetry. However, most of the poems, or all of the poems in this collection, also appear in another collection by Matthew Gilman, Before Light, which is out from BOA and is won the A. Pauline Jr. Poetry Prize. So I'm thinking Night Logic was a chapbook, and this is his Gilman's more proper debut collection. I think that's how it would work. Again, it's a really nice collection. I really enjoyed it. I've read it at least once and loved it. A lot of nice poems in here. So yeah, looking forward to more work by Gilman. Our Lady of the Flowers by Jean Genet, translated from the French by Bernard Fretchman. So this is a early 20th century gay novel about a man imprisoned, I believe. I need to give this a go. Gilgamesh, translated by Sophus Hele. So this is a new translation of the ancient Sumerian and Akkadian epic poem about a king of Uruk who is a tyrant until the gods have enough of his bullshit and send a wild man to tame the king. And their adventures together, and then the death of Enkidu, the wild man, and Gilgamesh's pursuit of immortality, and really learning how to become a good king. Since there is no known author, no known originator of Gilgamesh, I decided to, much like with Beowulf, I've decided to place the book with the using the title rather than the translator's surname. So that's why Gilgamesh is in the G's rather than in the H's. Selected Poems 1947 to 1995 by Allen Ginsberg. I had an earlier edition, or I had a different edition of this collection, and I stupidly got rid of it and kicked myself in the keister for it. So I picked up this edition. I'm not entirely in love with its look. I kind of would have preferred to have the similar edition to the one that I had originally, but it will do, and I do need to tackle Ginsberg's poetry in a bit more thorough way than I have in the past. Doll Apollo by Melissa Ginsberg. I picked this up a few years ago from LSU Press when they had their 40% off sale. Really good collection. I rather enjoyed it. The Collected Poetry of Nicky Giovanni, 1968 to 1998, obviously by Nicky Giovanni. So this is a collection of Giovanni's work from the first half of her career. Hopefully there will be a second Collected Poetry of Nicky Giovanni from 1998 to the end of Giovanni's life, which was, I think, a few years ago. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this collection. A lot of Giovanni's earlier work is a lot more political, a lot more angry than I'd originally thought it would be. And I think I need to reread it with that in mind to get a better sense of her work. I guess maybe that's because the one poem of hers I have in mind is more domestic than anything else. So I don't know. So I need to really revisit her work. Next is Poems 1962 to 2012 by Louise Gluck. So up until 2012, this would have been her collected poetry. But I know she's had at least one collection since then, before her death. This is a fantastic collection. It is just really, really amazing. It's been far too long since I last read it. The next batch of books are by Nadine Gordimer. First up is July's People, which I picked up a few months ago from Powell's. Burger's Daughter, which I don't quite remember where I picked this up from. I have a bit of unfinished business with this novel. The Conversationist by Nadine Gordimer. I also picked up from Powell's. Jump in Other Stories, again from Powell's. I have kind of dipped into this collection and I want to revisit it. And then My Son's Story, which I have, I think I picked this up from the Waco McLennan County Friends of the Library book sale nook. So it's been a while since I told this story, and I think what I might do in the show notes is tell it, because it's kind of what I wanted to do. In the show notes for this part is like talk about local used bookstores or the Waco McLennan County Friends of the Library. But so at the West Waco Library, and also I think the Central Library, although I've never really gone there, I think they have spaces for the Friends of the Library to sell books. So at the West Waco Library, there's a little nook in the lobby, or alcove, where they have some shelves. The lower shelves are magazines and copious amounts of National Geographic. And then the upper shelves are for books, mostly mass market paperbacks, most of them not in the best of condition, and also the occasional DXS library from the Waco McLennan County Library System, which is what this book in particular is. It was a DXS from them, and I'm pretty sure because of that they've kind of DXS'd it and just put it in the sale nook. So I've had this for quite a few years now, and I need to revisit it. Next is We So Seldom Look on Love by Barbara Gowdy. This is a short story collection. I had it when I was in my early 20s and got rid of it and regretted it and wanted it back in my collection. So I added it back a few years ago. The River Twice by Kathleen Graber. This is a slim volume of poetry. It was one of the selections for the Princeton series of contemporary poets a few years ago. And I picked it up from Princeton University Press during one of their 75% off sales, which occasionally, very rarely, Princeton will put a large number of their poetry collections in the sale. And the one year that they did, I basically grabbed them all up. Unfortunately, every year since, it's the same book, so it kind of kills the purpose of going back to that sale. The next two are by Jory Graham. First is The Dream of the Unified Field, Selected Poems 1974 to 1994. It won the Pulitzer Prize. This is the first collection of poetry that I ever read by Jory Graham, and it's my favorite, although that's not saying much. I haven't really dipped too much into her poetry outside of this collection, but it is amazing. I just recently picked up a more recent selected collection of her poetry from the New World, which is poems 1976 to 2014. So I need to get to this one and see how her poetry has changed since 1994. And then the next two books are by Günter Grass, and I think both of them are translated by Rolf Mannheim. First up is The Tin Drum, which is Günter Grass's most famous work. It's about a young boy during the Nazi occupation of Danzig, and him developing something that looks like he could be immortal, and also a superpowered shriek. And this is about his adventures. I dipped into this novel a few years ago, and I've been feeling an urge to give it another go, so I just recently added it to my library. I have read one book by Günter Grass, and that is The Rat. And so I bought this, or was gifted it, in when I was a teenager, and I read it, and I didn't quite know what to make of it. And then I got rid of that edition and was kicking myself for that. So a few years ago, I re-edited it to my collection. However, I haven't managed to get back into it. So even though this would be a reread, I still count this as having unfinished business. It's about it's kind of like multiple story strands. One is about a film producer who's dreaming that he's an astronaut at the end of the world, being sort of with sentient rats having taken over the world. He's working on a project dealing with fairy tales, and there's a group of women who are doing some scientific research while also knitting. So I would like to revisit this novel sometime this year and hopefully manage to reread it. Next is The Recent East by Thomas Grattan. This is his debut novel. It's about a family whose mother was born in East Germany, who, with the fall of the wall, and the unification of Germany, decides to return home with her children. And what happens afterwards. Next is, which I have unfinished business with. The Greek Myths by Robert Graves. This is Graves' retelling of the Greek myths with all that entails. Graves had decided opinions about Greek mythology, which probably are dated now. I have had this for a very long time, although I haven't revisited it in a while. So the final three books on this shelf are by Jim Grimsley. First up is Dream Boy. This is a haunting novel set in the, I want to say the 70s, but it could be the 60s, about a young man who falls in love with a neighbor, and something happens during a camping trip, and it deals with a lot of abuse, and possibly there is a resurrection of some kind at the end. It's been a very long time since I've read it. I read it when I was a teenager, and I haven't revisited it since. Work from the early 2000s by Grimsley is Boulevard. This is about a young man who moves to New Orleans and gets involved in the local New Orleans gay scene. I picked it up in the very early 2000s. This is one of the books that I actually picked up from Book People when I lived in Austin, but it took me probably about 15 years before I actually sat down to read it, and I want to give it another go because I really wasn't in the right mood to read Boulevard when I did. And finally, Grimsley's most recent novel, The Dove in the Belly, which came out a few years ago, and is about two college freshmen falling in love. and dealing with that. So that concludes the shelf and the first bookcase. So tomorrow, Monday, we will be starting the next bookcase with the end of the G's. You thought we were out of the G's, didn't you? Nope. I have a lot of G's. So new booktube. Until then, thank you. Have a great rest of your morning and have a great weekend.